Octagon 91 wrapped up last night in Cologne, Germany. And what a great night of fights we just had. So we went into this event with some big storylines, some bitter rematches, some underdog stories, surprises, and some pretty big chaos on the scales the day before on Friday. But we're going to break down exactly what went down on the main card, looking at how the fights played out, and also what this means for the Octagon divisions for the rest of the year. So let's get started with the main event of the night. The top of the bill, the middleweight title, Engizek versus Yotko 2. You see, this was all about bad blood and getting even. Kerim Engizek put his middleweight title on the line against the former UFC veteran Krzysztof Yotko, Polish. So if you know Octagon, you know the history, right? Back in January at the Tipsport Game Changer final, Yotko totally spoiled Engizek's night. He bypassed all the striking and dragged Engizek to the mat, and he choked him out in just over 3 minutes. Total disaster. But then, to rub salt in the wound, Yotko actually started dancing in the cage, right, and overly celebrating. A bit distasteful maybe. But since the title wasn't actually officially on the line that night, Engizek kept the belt, but Yotko definitely won the event. He won the ego battle, let's say. So going into last night, Engizek had to prove that he's fixed his takedown defense and could actually, use his kicks and his striking ability without getting put on his back and dominated, right? While Yotko just needed to kind of rinse and repeat his heavy wrestling game plan. So hold my hands up. I was rooting for Yotko, as I always tend to cheer for the Polish fighters in Octagon. Home bias, if you like. Now, obviously I'm British, but my adopted home is definitely here in good old Polska. But it was hard not to get swept up by the story of redemption for Engizek. The crowd was absolutely 100% behind him, German crowd. Yotko took the first round though with lots of excellent wrestling, forged in Poland and honed at American top team. Very good, Jim. Which was absolutely perfect for him, in terms of the game plan. And it was exactly how I imagine he wanted that fight to go. Engizek struggled to get into it, to be honest. I did feel like the commentary team wanted him to be, though. They were a bit biased towards him at times, but maybe I was reading something into that wasn't actually there. But the hometown crowd definitely was behind him, and that will have played a part in his adrenaline and his will to win. I didn't expect the fight to be as one-sided as it was to begin with. It was like a lot of very impressive wall work from Yotko as well. He really stopped Engizek from getting into any kind of rhythm. It was dominant, but it was not necessarily like constant, exciting back and forth action for the more casual fan. At least not for the first few rounds. But it was definitely very exciting in patches, especially later on when they were both more tired and they were throwing caution to the wind. Like, literally, Engizek did get more into it in the third, for example. But then there was maybe a low blow, and maybe it was intentional, maybe not, so he could get a rest while Yotko recovered from the low blow. They both got a rest, essentially. Engizek had a couple of points taken off for various other infractions as well. But overall, what a pair of absolute warriors. And two properly tough blokes. So, extremely well conditioned. In the end, Yotko got the nod on the judges' scorecards, and it capped off a decent night of fights. I don't think it was the best Octagon card I've seen recently. When you compare it to the April one and Octagon 90 a few weeks ago, which was the best I've ever seen. But it was definitely far from being a bad MMA card. Absolutely not. They've built a great product, and the baseline is always high. With Octagon, you know what you're going to get, and it's predictably always, at a very minimum, just good. And you can't ask for more than that, really, If you just want knockout after knockout, then watch Power Slap. But, let's also go into the second main event. It was the featherweight chaos from Friday. So this was a co-main event, and basically what had happened was it turned into a sort of mess, for lack of a better term, before anyone had even thrown a punch. So Muhammad Mokaev was supposed to defend his actual title against Gioni Palakai, but Mokaev missed the weight by over 2 pounds, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it is quite a lot. It was like 1.1 kilograms, I think. His body apparently just shut down during the weight cut, and Octagon fairly stripped him of his belt right there and then at the weigh-in. So we went into the cage of kind of lopsided stakes, because if Palakai won, then he becomes the new champion. And if Makayev won, the belt stayed vacant because he'd been stripped, right? He wasn't technically the champion anymore. And stylistically, this was an explosive kickboxer in Makayev going up against a relentless chain wrestler in Palakai. And the big question, I suppose, was whether a drained Makayev could survive the endless cardio of a guy who hadn't lost a fight in over 3 years. But how did it actually go down once the bell chimed? Well, it started off incredibly chess matchy, and literally still in the first round, Makayev landed a shot right on the button to, I guess, retain his title that he doesn't actually have. But he'll almost certainly be fighting for it again when he fights next time, I imagine. Let's just hope he can actually make the weight properly in future, otherwise he should probably consider moving up a weight division. I mean, the weight cuts in MMA irritate me, how it's such a big part of the sport and how it's such a big part of the strategy, even beyond boxing. But anyway, dominant performance, he took no punishment, and he got Palakai out of there quickly, so first guy to ever stop him, so yeah, fair play. One of the most interesting fights that I was looking forward to was Ducis versus Vinepoulter, and it was quite low down in the card, but it was a classic case of last minute madness. So Marc Ducis was supposed to fight a top ranked contender, but after a late withdrawal, Octagon brought in 40-year-old Austrian veteran Sasha Vinepoulter on just a couple of days' notice. And he'd been waiting for this opportunity for like months and months and months, just any chance to have another fight. And a fun fact about Vinepoulter, he was actually Yoel Romero's very first MMA opponent back in 2009. And Ducis was the massive favourite, right? He needed a big win after some pretty brutal knockout losses to the division's top guys, to be fair. But for Vinepoulter, this was something with zero preparation, really. His only real shot was to try and turn it into a crazy brawl and look for a quick stoppage. But given the situation, it's probably no surprise that Ducis emerged victorious after a completely dominant display. He got the tap in the first round with an arm triangle. Nice. That's the thing, right? In real life, the underdog movie script doesn't always play out like you might want. But that's not taking anything away from him, right? Anything away from Ducis. He'll move on to bigger and better things, and he fully deserved to win. Another undercard fight was a kind of middleweight crossroads one. It was Kinsel versus Kajavand. And we actually got one of my favourite stylistic matchups of the night. It was the ultimate clash of backgrounds. So Patrick Kinsel is MMA royalty in Europe. Alright, maybe that's a bit of a stretch, but he's a tactical, high IQ striker. Kajavand, on the other hand, is I don't know how you say this, working class hero. He's a guy who works 40 hours a week as a facility manager while also fighting as a pro. So another underdog in a way. And Kajavand's whole game plan is forward pressure and submissions, right? The story here was whether the facility manager by day could be the MMA champ by night and drag this former champion into a dogfight. It started off a cagey, no pun intended, affair, almost entirely stand up on the feet. Kinsel did well to get inside Kajavand's reach, which is quite a lot bigger, and get his own shots off to the body. It was very much another chess match in the opening round, apart from like a spin kick from Kinsel at the very end. It looked really cool, but it just grazed Kajavand. It didn't connect cleanly. In the second round, Kinsel just showed his higher fight IQ. He took the fight to the ground and he got the win via submission. An arm triangle again. Beautiful brutality, as I always say. And it's one of the submissions that I've been learning recently in my submission wrestling and jiu-jitsu training, so it's cool to see it end fights twice on one card. And honestly, it's extremely unpleasant to be on the receiving end of one of those things. I mean, it's so tight on your neck, it's horrible. Next up we're going to talk about was the welterweight gatekeeper test. It was Akipa versus Kurtej. Now, At this welterweight fight, it was the classic old guard versus the new young blood. We had rising star, German kickboxer Chihad Akipa riding a huge 5-fight win streak, going up against Hungarian veteran Mate Kertész. Now, Kertész, if you don't know who he is a grinder. He holds the Octagon record for the most takedown attempts ever, and he's fought everyone, right? A bit like Derek Chisora in boxing or something. But he came into this fight on a bad run, fighting for his career essentially. Akipa was the big favourite with the bookies, and he was just favourite to swarm him with speed and volume. So Kertész had one option, and that was to turn this into a boring, grueling wrestling match to survive. But what actually happened? Well, Kertész came out super aggressively, and that really surprised me and the commentary team, because he isn't really the striker between the two of them. But he came out punching before taking it to the ground. Akipa was on defense mode for the whole first round really, and yeah, it wasn't the most exciting fight, to be brutally honest. Lots of crossface and top pressure from Kertész and total control, at least in the first round. The second round saw more of the same. Kertész came out with pure aggression, fighting for his career, like I said. Striking at the beginning, straight into take him to the ground, and lots of top pressure and just grinding Akipa down really. But then Akipa, sneakily, on purpose I think, poked Kertész in the eye. He was just frustrated, but obviously no excuses. It was deliberate, and there's only 1 point deduction, but it could have easily been a disqualification, I think. It's pretty unsportsmanlike, you know? But the third round saw a total swing in the turn of events because Akipa realised he was almost certainly going to lose on points. So he pulled off a stoppage against the run of play with a knee against the cage after a pretty sustained onslaught. On the face of it, despite all the ground fighting, like I said, it was actually a lot more entertaining, including for a casual fan, and maybe more interesting is a better word than entertaining. Because the way I'm describing it makes it sound really boring, but I actually really enjoyed it. But I can't help but feel sorry for Kertész after the eye poke, considering that he was doing so well up until that point, and it probably did swing things. It took his momentum away. I do need to point out that the planned Dulatov versus Jankovic fight was cancelled due to some health issues on Dulatov's part. And that could have been a really entertaining matchup, so I guess all I can say is get well soon, and hopefully they reschedule it. And that just about wraps up the main card for Octagon 91. If you watched it, let me know what you think in the comments. And just before I go, depending on what the promotion decides to do with that featherweight title picture and how the middleweight hierarchy settles after tonight's fights, the matchmaking for the rest of 2026 is going to be pretty fascinating. But yeah, there's a lot of jiu-jitsu, a lot of chain wrestling, and a lot of top pressure tonight. A bit of a grappler's masterclass, if you like. And I must say, given my current situation with training, definitely not underappreciated. Anyway, over to you, KSW. I'm very much looking forward to their 120 show next weekend. I can't help but root for Szpilka, Artur Szpilka. There's a great Netflix documentary about him, at least on Polish Netflix. And yeah, he's not the main event next week, but he's arguably the biggest star on the card, at least for a boxing fan like me. Anyway, drop your comments below and let me know what you thought was the performance of the night. And as always, like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.